Hi, Gwen. Nice to see you again.
Hi, how's it going?
Going great. Thank you for coming on here again. Last time we talked to you, we were talking about recycling, and you're still the recycling coordinator, correct?
Yeah, I'm the recycling coordinator for Santa Monica College here in Los Angeles.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about zero waste burnout, which is something that I've wanted to talk about for a really long time. And then you actually did a post of a picture from a while ago, and you were just like, oh, back in my hardcore zero waste days. And that got me thinking about how different things are now from when we first started. And I thought you would be an excellent person to discuss that with. So, can you explain how your zero waste journey has gone so far? Like how you got into zero waste for those who don't know?
Yeah, so for reference, I'm 26 now, and at 19, I started living a strictly zero waste lifestyle, largely inspired by like Bia Johnson, which is Zero Waste Home, and oh, who's the one that's going zero waste, Catherine Kellogg, and just the other zero wasters that were on Instagram keeping all their trash in a little
Lauren
waste.
Singer.
Yeah, Lauren Singer, that's the other one I was trying to think of. And so even at the time that I started living zero waste, I understood that individuals living zero waste wasn't really the solution to our global waste system. But it still felt like that was the way that the zero waste movement was being represented on social media. So I felt like I had to do that aspect in order for it to be like valid. Um, and so I didn't consistently do the zero waste jar thing, but I would challenge myself pretty regularly to do like a month where I would keep all of my trash in a jar. And so I did that for about 3 years. I also worked as the zero waste coordinator in sustainability at my university, which was Western Washington University in Washington State. Um, and so the zero waste movement was really my whole life while I was in college. I was studying business and sustainability, which was a combined major with business management and environmental studies. I started the Students for Zero Waste Club at Western. I was doing consulting with local businesses and music festivals to help them manage their waste better. Um, and yeah, I was also, it was my lifestyle. So I didn't buy any packaged foods. I was buying mostly fresh produce, and then I would buy dry goods in the bulk aisle for pasta and sauces and stuff like that. Thankfully, our local grocery store in Bellingham, where my university was, had a really amazing bulk section where you could get pretty much everything you wanted without packaging. Even tofu, they had like floating in this big bin, and you could put that in your own Tupperware, which I've never seen at any other grocery store.
That's like a zero waster dream right there.
Yes, it's pretty amazing. And I understood at the time that like I was very privileged to be in a community where we had that as a resource. And I was really privileged to have the time and energy to dedicate to preparing all of my food, since I had to cook so much of my own stuff, and just like all of the other things that go into living that kind of lifestyle. Um, so yeah, that's how it began.
That's amazing. I feel like zero wasters often start in kind of that college age. Mine started more in high school, but like really kind of amped up in college. So I kind of see that as a common theme here.
Yeah, I think it's
Um,
common because like as people start to learn about the environmental issues, um, they obviously want to start to do something about it. And so college is often for people the first time that they're really exposed to the whole system of um, capitalism and sustainability.
and
It's also,
also when you're first starting to be more autonomous and making your own
yeah,
decisions as well. So
exactly.
it's
It's the
kind of
first time you're
both
doing your
balance.
own grocery shopping and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Um,
can you provide some definitions on what zero waste burnout is, or eco guilt, which is kind of like a trendy thing, or I call it eco fatigued? Can you maybe
yeah.
provide your own personal definitions for those?
Yeah, so eco anxiety is like its own thing. I would say it kind of starts with eco anxiety. So, eco anxiety is anxiety related to the state of our climate and our planet. So, being aware of our environmental impact can be really stressful for an individual, and being aware of the fact that our government and companies have a much bigger role to play in the system. And so, it can be stressful to feel like there's nothing you can do as an individual. And then zero waste burnout, I would say, is what happens when you've gone to an extreme to do your best to be super environmentally friendly. And then you just get burned out by the level of time and attention that takes. And also frustrated by realizing the systems that you're up against that are not changing as much as you're working to change yourself. And then, yeah, eco guilt, I would say, is like related. Eco guilt, I think, happens from the beginning of the process too, just like feeling like a piece of shit for using plastic or a disposable cup, or forgetting to bring your grocery bags to the grocery store.
Or too tired to just put effort into anything.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, so for me, I really noticed a big shift at the beginning of the pandemic because our co-op here in Santa Monica wouldn't let you bring your own reusable containers to fill up in the bulk aisle anymore. And they stopped providing paper bags, which they used to do. So you could fill up just a paper bag instead of a plastic one. And I don't know why that was. And it took them a long time to start. They eventually started offering reusable jars that they sanitized, and it was like a deposit system, and their employees would like fill the containers for you, but that made it a lot more tedious to try to do it zero waste instead of being able to fill your own jars. But yeah, and like local businesses were not accepting reusable coffee cups. You weren't allowed to bring your own reusable bags into grocery stores for a little while, all of which we've realized now is not actually an issue, but because we didn't understand much about COVID at the beginning, there were concerns about COVID existing on surfaces for long periods of time and getting people sick that way. But we now realize that the way that you get sick from COVID primarily is from it being around in the air that you're breathing in. So there's not actually any safety concerns with using reusable containers, or at least no more so than there was before. Like, of course, germs are still a thing. But as long as you're like washing your hands and washing your containers, it's fine to use.
And I would think that bringing your own would be more sanitary than using what's there that's being exposed to things. I mean, that would just be my assumption is like, hey, these are my germs, my cup, I'm using my cup, I'm not physically touching anything.
Yeah, I think
that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, the concern is like if employees have to touch your goods,
yeah,
then they're spreading people's germs. But yeah, and so I think a lot of zero wasters started to recognize that there were bigger institutional issues that were preventing people from being able to engage in living zero waste. And I think the whole movement became a lot more forgiving at the beginning of the pandemic. Like we saw Catherine Kellogg going zero waste on Instagram. She did a whole thing at the very beginning of the pandemic where she showed her waste from getting takeout that week, which is something that she hadn't had to do in a long time because she used to bring her own reusable containers, but she still wanted to support her local businesses by getting takeout. And so, yeah, I think everyone started to realize that like zero waste is not just on the individual, and we really need to work with local businesses and our governments to create systems that are zero waste. Yeah, and that was really like the big turning point for me as well. I like became a lot more.
I would love to get into maybe like your own personal experience with eco burnout.
Yeah.
Like what is your personal experience with it, if you care to share any?
Yeah, so I will say, I think part of the important backstory is that when I was 19, shortly before I started living zero waste, I went through a lot of trauma. I was in a relationship and then was raped by someone else, not my partner. And then my partner broke up with me because essentially they blamed me for the rape happening. And so I was in a really dark place at the beginning of living zero waste. And I think the reason I latched onto it so hard was because it gave me a really strong sense of control over my life. And I realize now that that developed into an eating disorder as well, because I was only allowing myself to eat, unprocessed foods, like mostly fresh produce. And I wasn't super good at eating a balanced diet. And I was really like restricting myself from eating because I wouldn't allow myself, if I hadn't prepared food and I was like stuck on campus longer than I thought I would be, I like refused to buy anything because there was only plastic packaged options. And so it really became like a masked eating disorder, essentially. And it took me a long time to realize that that had happened. And so I think for me, it was always unsustainable, but it just felt like the only way that I could actually feel confident in trying to be sustainable, if that makes sense. Like it just made me feel better about what I was doing, even though I really understood that individual impact is not the solution when we live in a capitalist system. Like we all need to collectively be working together. And so I think over time, I just started to realize that like the amount of time and energy I was putting into trying to minimize my own personal environmental impact as much as possible was taking up time that I could have been working on community organizing or helping businesses or even just taking care of my mental health better. And so I started to just become a lot more forgiving about with myself. After graduating from college, I moved home to my hometown, Leavenworth, which is my background. And I actually started working on community organizing there. I started a group called Zero Waste Leavenworth, and we started advocating for a plastic bag ban. And just talking too about in general what Leavenworth needed to do in order to move towards zero waste. And I was only in my hometown for about 6 months before moving to Los Angeles. But kind of during that time, I let myself be a lot more flexible about zero waste, but was still trying to buy in bulk when possible and cooking a lot for myself. And then I moved to Los Angeles and had to start from scratch again because zero waste is so dependent on your routine. I had to kind of figure out what grocery stores I could go to and like a good routine for doing those things, and also when to meal prep because I was working full time now, and all of that stuff. And so I think just being forced to like reinvent the wheel, kind of, I didn't have to be perfect all of the time. And also at some point it clicked for me that like perfectionism, like sustainability has absolutely nothing to do with perfectionism. And for some reason, that's like a big, that's a big thing that you see in the environmental movement. Like people will say in their Instagram bio, like, I'm an imperfect environmentalist. And it's like, well, what the heck is a perfect environmentalist? Like everybody has a carbon impact. Everybody uses resources. Like
Well, and I think that's a really big misconception about the zero waste movement is that people think that as educators or something that we're like somehow superior or immune to to this. And in reality, we're just people who have a certain set of values of caring about the environment, and we're just trying to do our best to make personal choices, which we can control. You know, we can't control what Bezos is doing or what Coca-Cola is doing,
Yeah.
but I can control what I'm buying, and I can try and make better purchasing decisions. And in some small way that helps. Like you said, there's definitely a whole nother side that is not super talked about, although it's starting to be talked about more.
Yeah.
There is that little aspect of it that does give you that feeling of control. You're like, I can do something. May not be like a lot on this grand scale, but it's a lot on this scale.
Mhm.
But yeah, I agree. That's a totally big misconception, is that we're like totally perfect. We never buy plastic. We never use plastic. We don't look at plastic. We can't even talk about plastic, you know?
Yeah.
So
And I think we kind of stepped on our own toes in the environmental movement because like veganism and then followed by the zero waste movement were kind of the big lifestyle choices that people knew they could make. Some people also like, you know, are car free, and that's like its own subsect of like extremism in the environmental movement.
well, and minimalism too.
Yeah, and minimalism too. And so I think the early days of the sustainability movement on social media was a lot of white women with their very white homes that were super minimalist and their glass jars. And it was very much so about perfectionism. And that is just an extension of capitalism. And I think that this competition for who can create the smallest amount of trash is just like a result of capitalistic ideals. The reality is, like, in sustainability, we are not competing against each other. We are supposed to be working together to create sustainable communities. And so that was like the big mindset shift for me. Yeah.
Lovely. I love that. All right, let me look at my notes here. Oh, here's a good one. Can you describe your approach from starting zero waste to now? And what I mean by that, we kind of touched on that a little bit, but more like when you started, your expectations versus after being in it for so many years, the reality and how that's kind of changed.
Yeah. So like I said, when I started the zero waste thing, I was very hardcore about it. And would like carry any compostable things with me home in my backpack in order to be able to compost them. And like I refused to buy anything that was wrapped in plastic. And I only thrifted clothing. I never bought new clothing, even if it was like from a sustainable brand, except for like underwear. And then when the pandemic hit and I became unemployed, I was unemployed for about 8 months at the beginning of the pandemic. I just realized that like buying the more sustainable option wasn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, you cut out there. Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was unemployed for about 8 months. And so my priorities just really shifted a lot. I didn't have extra money to be spending on more sustainable alternatives or buying from more sustainable brands. So I became a lot more just about being minimalist and not buying things that I didn't need, which of course should be the first step anyways, which I was doing a lot when I was in college. But I was more flexible about it, I guess. Um, and I just really kind of let myself completely let go of the idealistic zero waste lifestyle. And I really, at the beginning of the pandemic, because you couldn't even bring your reusables places, it really forced me to kind of give up. And I still like bought a lot of unpackaged produce when possible and wasn't like adding unnecessary packaging to things. But it really, for the like first year of the pandemic when we weren't allowed to use reusables much, I kind of just let it go. And then I've been slowly reincorporating the habits that are actually useful to me. And I guess that's my biggest mindset shift, is that like zero waste and sustainable living can provide so many benefits to individuals. Like obviously buying less is going to save you money, eating more plants is healthier for you. Composting is not that hard, especially if your city provides a green bin for
Sense of
compost.
community.
Yeah, a sense of community is a huge one. And also like, yeah, if you're volunteering for nonprofits and stuff, like then you have a sense of purpose. So all of those things are super beneficial to your lifestyle and are worth incorporating regardless of like your environmental impact. But then at a certain point, trying to avoid packaging becomes stressful and it becomes unhealthy for your physically and for your mindset. And so I think it just became a lot more about understanding my own needs and starting to be more forgiving about the little things that don't really matter that much. Of course, like our overwhelming, like our collective societal use of plastic is pretty out of control, but also like individuals using a plastic thing or like buying plastic wrapped tortillas, for example, which I never ever allowed myself to buy tortillas when I was in college because they were plastic wrapped. Like the reality is that little plastic Ziploc bag is not the problem. And my perspective is that like corporations have done a really good job of making individuals feel like we're responsible for the plastic packaging. But the reality is companies are fully capable right now of making zero waste packaging that can biodegrade quickly and naturally in our environment. And like they're fully capable of creating take back programs for their packaging where they're then responsible for recycling it. So it's just the fact that like corporate ability to control our environmental impact as a country than individuals really do. And the truth is, like, the 5% of hardcore environmentalists that are out there doing this level of extremism in their own lifestyle is not going to make the significant, substantial change that we need to see happen in the next 10 years. And I think oftentimes it tricks us into feeling like we are that kind of difference. And so we don't push as hard as we should be on the companies and on our government to make the change. So it's like we see these zero waste influencers on Instagram talking about these little eco-friendly lifestyle tips and tricks that people can implement, like using their coffee grounds to make a body scrub, which, like, fun, cute, but like, is that radical? Is that going to shift systems? Does that even relate to a circular economy? No. And like, we need to be having these conversations about like, how do we actually work together as a community to change systems? And I get that that's a harder conversation to have, but we need to figure out how to talk about that. And we need to figure out how to talk about it in a way that's like digestible to normal people. So yeah, I feel like I really like diverged from the initial question on that.
No, that's great. No, if it's flowing, you speak. What would you give advice to someone who is currently experiencing zero waste burnout? Like similar to you, they've just been going at it hard, and then now they're just like, gosh, what's the point? I could just be living a convenient lifestyle. Why am I doing this? Like, what would your advice be to someone who is currently going through this?
Yeah, my initial advice is that really I think stepping back and recognizing that your zero waste lifestyle actually doesn't fucking matter is helpful. I think
that's going to cause riots in the community.
Yeah, I don't think that people like this feedback, especially because I'm a sustainability professional, but I'm just like really tired of pretending that individual lifestyle choices matter that much. Of course, like going vegan does have a significant impact on your carbon impact from like what you eat. But again, like when we look at this scale of the problem, one person going vegan isn't that significant. And it's just like an illusion. And it can inspire your family. And if you're talking with your community about it and you get an institution you work for to offer vegan options, like those are like next level things. But again, I just think it tends to be more of a band-aid than actually making the kind of difference that we think it does. And I say this as a person who, like, I spoke at conferences around the country.
That's how we met.
Yeah, convincing people that they needed to try to live zero waste. Not necessarily to the extreme that I was, but I really felt like I had to be the example. And I think that our society really likes to have martyrs. We really like people to be the example. And I don't think it's fair necessarily, because the people who can go to these extremes are living in circumstances that are very different than the common American. Like, so many people in the US live in food deserts where they can't even buy fresh produce, let alone package-free food or have access to bulk grocery shopping. And so it's just honestly embarrassing to look back now at what I was preaching when I was in that time of my life. But people really were like super inspired by seeing this level of extremism. And I just think that like the whole aspect of having martyrs or like our heroes, it puts people on a pedestal and makes it seem like it should be achievable for common people. And it just like, again, ignores the systems that we're up against when we're talking about an actual zero waste society.
I agree. And I think a lot of it has to do with part of being it like part of your identity. I know
Yeah,
for me, like when I started having some hard realizations, um, it was like part of your identity dies and you're just like, okay, well, like what am I supposed to do now? Especially if you start from a young age, you really like identify with it. It becomes part of your personality, part of how people perceive you, how you are showing yourself to the world.
yeah,
And when we make those shifts, people are just like, whoa, like, what do I identify as now? Like, how are people supposed to label me and things like that? And I think that can also shift into the same thing that I think people expect you to be one thing forever
yes,
and never change. And that's not realistic. I am not the same person. You are not the same person as we were, when we first started. We probably may or may not have some of the same values and ideas. And, we had certain life experiences that changed us and shaped us. And I think it's very unfair for people to be like, oh, well, you're not a real zero waster. Oh, you don't really care about the environment if this, that, and the other, and you don't do this, that, and the other. So I completely agree with you on that. I think that's a
yes.
wonderful perspective.
And I think the other thing is, and maybe this is silly, but like, who's to say that you don't deserve a convenient lifestyle? Like, I think that it's valid to want things to be easy, especially things that like food. Like you need food consistently throughout the day. And like so many people struggle with just literally making meal prepping a habit. And that's with plastic packaging. So the level of stress that you're under if you have to meal prep every single one of your meals for the week in order to keep up with your lifestyle, it's a significant time investment and it takes a lot of habit changes in order to achieve zero waste. And there are going to be weeks where you're too busy or life is hard and like it's okay to not be able to achieve this level of perfectionism. Like it's an unrealistic ideal to begin with. And even when, and I think everyone who's into zero waste gets this, but the waste that we produce as consumers is a very, 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 very
Yeah.
small portion of the
Yeah.
waste that is created in the world. So, like, for example, if you're buying plastic packaged food or whatever, or like a better one's food waste, like the food waste generated in your home is a very small portion when you compare it to the amount of food that doesn't even leave farms and orchards across the country because farmers grow enough food to fulfill the contract that they have with the corporation that will buy it. And then they will only harvest until the contract is fulfilled. And so they will stop harvesting the food if the contract is already completed. Like that food just doesn't get picked because it's a waste of money to pay people to pick it if you don't have someone to sell it to. So there are systems that are way bigger than like us forcing ourselves to eat leftovers that are gross and a week old. Um, and genuinely,
See
there were so
that.
like genuinely there were so many times in college where I sat there and like forced myself to eat meals that I didn't cook well or that I had been eating for 5 days and was just tired of. And from a nutritional standpoint, like if eating something doesn't taste good or you're not enjoying it, that's probably because it's not the nutrients your body is needing at that time. And it's important to listen to that as well. um, but I think like I get caught in the same conversation when people are like, oh, well, I really care about the environment, but I feel like my body really craves red meat. And it's like, there's there's a lot of opinions about whether or not your body actually craves red meat, right? But who am I to say that that is not true for you? And the reality is, it doesn't really matter. Like, go ahead and eat a hamburger once a week, or like eat red meat once a day. I don't care. Like, working on reducing your environmental impact to any extent is valid. And like I'm just so tired of people guilting and blaming other people for not doing it the right way.
Well, and
When in
I
reality,
love, I'm gonna go off of what you just said here. In my whole business and like my coaching and just what I try and preach online basically is that every person is unique and they have a different lifestyle. Like my lifestyle is not the same as your lifestyle and vice versa, you know? It depends on a lot of factors and accessibility is one of them. And I think that's another thing is that the zero waste movement has created this cookie cutter, one size fits all, when in reality, zero waste looks different and sustainability looks different for every person.
yeah. And it's like, if you, I mean, one thing is like, okay, so maybe you want to eat red meat on occasion, but you never buy new clothes. And then compare that to a vegan who buys new clothes, but only from sustainable brands. Like that still has a huge water impact, a huge resource impact. We're not like, let's not even get into the discussion about like the ethical standpoint of killing an animal to eat it. But
I think this
um,
this is an interesting perspective because I was a rancher for a while, and like I think I think we both have different views on this topic. But
yeah,
I love hearing your perspective. So please
my
continue.
grandpa was a cattle rancher, actually.
Yeah, no, please continue. I love to hear others.
Yeah, so it's like it's just people love to boil down environmental choices and make them seem um, right and wrong.
Mhm.
But the reality is there are so many factors that go into actually calculating your environmental impact. And so it just becomes such a pointless conversation, especially for like the average person. Another container or like one product to another and try to determine what is better. And I get that like the sustainability movement is trying to make those choices easier for folks. And so generally vegan options are going to have a lesser environmental impact. But like a great one that I get backlash for saying is that the zero waste movement loves glass. And we love to say that glass is infinitely recyclable, which
That causes a lot of energy. Yeah.
it's true that like you can take a glass jar or a glass bottle from food beverages and you can recycle that glass over and over again. But the reality is the recycling industry does not actually support infinite recycling of anything. So sure, it is an infinitely recyclable material, but it's still a disposable product. And using anything as a single use or disposable product is the problem. And so you don't magically fix the problem by using a glass jar. So like, for example, in my hometown of Leavenworth, glass is not accepted for recycling at all. And this is true in a lot of rural America. Like since China stopped accepting glass for recycling, it's put a big impact on local recycling programs to be able to have a profitable market for some of their materials. And so it's not always true that glass is going to get recycled, even if you put it into your recycling bin. It's dependent on so many different factors that it's like recyclability is not determined just by what something is made out of. It's determined by the global market and the cost of oil and so many other things. So I, again, just think that it's not always a good choice to make sustainability choices seem like they're simple.
I
Or
agree.
that one thing is always superior to the other.
And I would love to do, because you're from a rural town, right?
My hometown has 2,000 residents.
Oh wow, yeah, that is very small. I currently I've always lived in a rural America and landlocked in the desert. I've always been in the desert. I mean, I've traveled lots of places, but yeah, living full time, that's where I've been. And so I would love to do another video another time about talking about our experiences trying to live more sustainable in a rural location.
Yeah. And I would
Be a
love
fun topic.
the juxtaposition of sustainable living in a big city compared to a rural community would be really cool. Because like I now
Yeah.
live in Los Angeles and have
Well,
been trying.
and that's my point is that when I was learning a lot about zero waste, my dog just got up, sorry. Predominantly all of that information was living in a big city. And for
Mhm.
someone who lives in a rural, more conservative area, a lot of that stuff just doesn't happen here,
Yeah.
And
But
so,
there's like so many sustainability accounts on social media that are all about like back to the land and like homesteading. So like
yeah,
that's a
which
totally
is not
different
a new
way.
concept.
Yeah. But like that's a totally different way to approach sustainable living than to live in a city. So like if you live in rural America, you're probably unlikely to be able to give up your car or use public transportation. Like I didn't use a bus. I did not go on a bus until I was 18. Um, and just like, even though it was a small town, I didn't bike anywhere. Like everybody drove everywhere. That was just like how we got around. Um, and yeah, if you live in a city and your grocery store is a couple blocks away, walking everywhere is feasible, or taking public transportation may be feasible. Um, but yeah, I think there's so many different aspects that make other people's lifestyles different. And I think that the sustainability movement needs to be way more inclusive of different lifestyles and much more understanding of um, privilege and the systems that we're up against.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation. I always love interviewing you. As I said, I think we have a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And I really love conversing with you. I think you're a very interesting person. Where can people find you on social media? Do you want to plug any upcoming things that are going on or social media?
So my Instagram is at Gwen Larned, GwenLarned. My website is also gwenlarned.com. I recently saw that it's like not working for some reason, so I have to figure that out. But yeah, all my social media is just my name because I'm apparently the only Gwen Larned in the world. Easy. I don't really have any upcoming events or anything that I'm
Yeah,
doing.
no worries. I hope for anyone who wants to connect with you to visit your social media, you post a lot of educational things and surfing. I love that. And just awesome content. So if anyone wants to connect with Gwen, please reach out to her or see her or blah, blah, blah. Please follow her on Instagram and visit her website. Thank you so much for today, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good to see you.
To see you. Bye.